Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name's Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. Thanks for joining us for our March events. We just kicked things off yesterday with our first hangout, and we have a whole great lineup coming up this month. Today, we're going to be hanging out with Breezy Grenier. Breezy served for 4 years in the United States Coast Guard. After that, she went to the University of Rhode Island to get her degrees in geology and geologic oceanography. She is a mariner, educator, scientist, and explorer. So she really has a passion for the deep sea, but also polar exploration. So she's been to the North Pole, to Antarctica, and everywhere in between. She's been all over the world to remote locations and seen firsthand the impact that we're having on our planet, even in the places we don't see every day. So Breezy, it is so good to steal a little bit of your time. We're excited to learn a little bit more about your adventures, and then we'll let the classrooms fire away with some questions.
Sounds good, Joe. So as Joe explained, I'm an Ocean M.E.S.E. So what that is I'll take contracts. So sometimes I'll work on boats. I'll even be the captain of the vessel. I'll go around on scientific expeditions, lend in my area of expertise, and I'll also go around doing educational programs, such as this, focusing on plastics, polar and deep sea exploration, and I even teach scuba diving, snowboarding, and even boating, just because there's so many ways we can go enjoy our planet. And you can actually be a real life explorer too, which I think in this day and age is a pretty cool job title. So I made a quick PowerPoint because I want to show some of the areas that I've been able to go to and the beauty that we don't always get to see or hear about. So when I did first graduate high school, I went to the United States Coast Guard. I was stationed up in Alaska, and I actually just recently did another internship up in Alaska. So it was nice to see the difference after 12 years of being there. But the Arctic is what really draws my interest because I not only like the cold, I can handle working in the cold. And it's just a beauty that we don't always get to see. So you'll see phenomena like the Northern Lights or even sundogs. And it's great when you're driving along and you'll see glaciers just right at your doorstep. Working at sea is a whole new experience because you get to see things other people don't get to see. A lot of times people might fly into places, they might drive into places, but when you approach an area by the water, it's a completely different visual of that. Oops. I was able to go down south, well, for what I'll call down south, down to New Zealand, over to the Marshall Islands, Guam, Hawaii, all over the world. And one thing that we'll see evidence that humans have been there. Either we're building up structures, getting access to these remote locations, harvesting energy from these locations. I'll see wildlife, and more recently I've been able to compare wildlife that I've been seeing over a period of time. Some of them you'll actually see stress in their behavior from the changing weather patterns, the changing climate. Sometimes they have to travel farther to get food, or you'll actually see them having to deal with the garbage or the marine debris in their actual area. And something else I see a lot of pollution, especially in plastics. And it's becoming to the point where I can't even go to a beach, and we might even just, a lot of these photos will be from remote areas. I live a hop, skip, and a drive from the beach here, and when I walk the shore, I'll see balloons, I'll see cups, I'll see straws. So it's not only all around the world, it's in our own backyard as well. These photos, they're from Alaska, up in Greenland, and up in Canada. And a lot of the garbage isn't even from those areas. It's being brought in through the ocean currents. It's being transported from other areas. And I'll see a lot of abandoned infrastructure. In our past, when we would go explore, we would either build something up saying that we now have this area, we built something on it, it's ours, or we were here first. It might be preparing for an expedition that lost interest or lost funding. In some cases, we actually will send our garbage to other countries. And a lot of times it just gets forgotten about, because if we no longer have to see or deal with it, then who's there to clean it up? And what we've been seeing too a lot recently in the Caribbean, if a hurricane comes and destroys an area, the infrastructure just gets left behind, and they'll either rebuild next door, but they won't really clean up what was there to begin with, or reuse the materials there. In the Antarctic, they'll actually have places that used to be areas of high historical importance, such as with the whaling industry. So they've actually cleaned up some areas and made it presentable. They take care of the area to make sure it's limiting the effects on the wildlife the least. But then we'll go into areas after going on a hike or walking in some remote location to come across another abandoned development. So you can start seeing in the bottom of the photo. This is in Stromness Bay, where it used to be a whaling station. Whaling, of course, we stopped doing because we found other forms of energy and realized it wasn't the best. And now that is just there for the environment to take over. Even areas that are traveled, that have tourists, right outside those areas, you'll come across debris that's washed up, and what are we going to do with it? A lot of it just gets left there. This is in Deception Island. They actually built a meteorological station inside an active volcano. And when the volcano erupted, they actually left the remnants of this station there. So this is a going trend that I'm seeing worldwide. And we need to remember, if we're going to these remote areas, if we're going to build something, we either need to take care of it and make sure that it's maintained and imposing the least amount of damage to the environment, or we need to go and clean it up. And a lot of times it's more cost efficient just to leave the infrastructure there, because it's expensive to bring the material home, especially if we're not going to be able to use it. There's also oil reserves and oil containers left everywhere. And a lot of them, they're just slowly rusting out and leaking into the environment. And the wildlife has to learn to live around it. And that's not what we should be seeing. These are containers that we should be able to go and collect and go take back, and try having as least amount of footprint left in the environment as possible. But they're just left there. And what we are starting to know now is how we can change our actions in the future. So when you guys grow up to be scientists and engineers and even photographers, videographers, educators, whatever your career path is, knowing what you know is how we can change what we're doing in the future. So if you want, I have a site too that I'll post expeditions you guys can follow and ways that we can try changing our plastic habits. And you're always more than welcome to follow myself along. And a couple of tips on some things you can even change in your habits today. So how many people will still use a water bottle to bring it in? Oh, I like the recycled water bottles. You guys are already ahead of me. So I got mine too. We could already start reducing our input by switching to something we can reuse every day. When you go with your parents to the grocery store, you can actually look at what the material some of the stuff is made in. So you can get a reusable glass and refill it with some chemical cleaners instead of having a plastic one that we have to throw away. You can start thinking of ways that we can reuse things, because even if we reuse everything at least twice, think about how much that's going to reduce our waste. So So even egg cartons, you can actually, they make great holders for growing plants. Just fill it with soil and seeds, and you can cut them up and just put it right into the soil. You can use it for painting projects to keep the paint different. So there's a lot that we have that we can already reuse in different ways instead of just throwing everything away. There's a lot too that we don't realize that we actually can recycle. So you can go and look up your local recycling program through your town or state, and find out what you can actually recycle and what you can't. And if you can't recycle it, try finding a way to reuse it, or ask yourself, do you really need it? So there's a bunch of packaging material. So sometimes fruits and vegetables or meat will come on a foam disc. It's actually recyclable. Phone cases, that the packaging, this is recyclable in my area. So it's important to educate yourself, because only 10% of recycling gets recycled. But we could even take a step farther and actually just not even use it, or find a way to reuse it ourselves instead of having to recycle. So.
All right. Well, Breezy, thank you so much for sharing some of the locations you've been, some of the remote locations. And I think for a lot of us, it's out of sight, out of mind. We don't think about how we're affecting these areas. They seem so far away and so far removed from humans or human settlements. But it's amazing what we've left behind, not only from our exploration, but what's gone there through ocean currents and other activities. So you're right, it's kind of an unseen problem that's affecting those environments that I don't think is on a lot of people's radar, which is too bad, because those are some of the most pristine environments that we do have on our planet.
Yeah. And even when people go on vacation, how many people are going to take a picture of the garbage that they see, opposed to finding the perfect sunset? So we'll train ourselves to keep that out of our sight, and kind of hide it, because we want to remember the good of an area. We don't want to remember the garbage and the debris.
So Breezy, before we start talking to some classrooms, I want to ask you about a particular expedition. I believe it was a couple of years ago with Sedna, and you were actually getting into the water in some of these really cold regions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so water only gets so cold. And luckily with technology nowadays, we have heated dry suits that keep us nice and warm. So what we were doing is we were doing ROV workshops. So building ROVs that have little cameras to explore the underwater. They're doing aquarium programs in years past, where we would actually go dive and collect some of the sea critters and bring them up, so local communities could see them for themselves. And snorkel safaris. So we would actually bring some community members in the water with us to see what's below the water. Because when you go underwater, it's a whole new world. And even a lot of places under the water, a lot of garbage used to be dumped into the ocean directly, thinking that's a good spot. It's not taking up any land. So a lot of times you'll come up to areas where lots of garbage, lots of tires, even old war tanks, cars. So it's amazing what you'll come across. Luckily, we didn't come across that much underwater dumping sites in the Arctic, but we still would find a lot of fishing debris along the shorelines, and a lot of plastic bags, and a lot of plastic wrappers and straws. So just knowing how far that this plastic waste is traveling into an area that's quickly becoming ice-free, the plastics having no problem moving into these locations. So.
And I think that's another thing that we forget about a lot, is just because something hits the ocean in one spot doesn't mean it's going to stay there. Those currents can carry it all over the world. And I think the statistic right now is between 8 to 9 million tons of plastic are being dumped in our ocean every year, which is the equivalent of a dump truck every minute. So it's pretty scary when you think about how much plastic we put in our ocean. And I think now it's getting pretty hard to take a sample and not find little pieces of plastic in it. even if it's microplastics, so microscopic ones that we can't even see.
Yeah, they were even finding microplastics inside the animals that lived at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. So that's the bottom of the ocean. And so it really is a problem worldwide. It has gone everywhere.
Yeah.
So our actions, we can start trying to fix that and correct our mistakes.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective. We see the ocean as this huge thing. How could we possibly affect it? But we really are having a big effect. And then for some of our classrooms, like Illinois, Niagara Falls, Thunder Bay, close to the Great Lakes, we're even finding lots of microplastics and plastics in the Great Lakes. So it's not just restricted to our oceans. Anywhere that humans live near water, we usually end up filling with plastics, unfortunately. All right. Well, let's meet some classrooms and let's take some of their questions. So let's see. Let's go first to Illinois. We have some grade 4s hanging out with Mrs. Smith. Let's get their microphone turned on and see how they're doing. I'm going to try and turn it on, but your teacher might have to do it for me. How are we doing, grade 4s? Yeah, Mrs. Smith, if you don't mind turning it on for me, I can't turn it on right now. So,
all right, can you hear me now?
We gotcha. Let's try that again. How are we doing, grade 4s?
Great. How are you doing?
All right. Who's got a question for Breezy? You can ask about her adventures. You can ask about plastics and garbage in our oceans, whatever you like.
Okay. Hi, my name is Yancy, and I was wondering if if we could use plastic from the ocean and try to reuse it and use it for like household stuff, like maybe instead of making new plastic or using it, we could get it from the ocean and we can just reuse it and do it. So my question is how can we do that, and would it make a big effect of growing less plastic in the ocean?
That's a good question. So there's already a couple of companies out there that will go and collect the plastic and turn it into new products. So there's sneakers that have come out, there's clothing that has come out, and there is some that has been reused for other materials. The problem is that when we're reusing the plastic, it's hard to, the plastic that's used for, sometimes when you have to mold it, it might release some extra chemicals. It's also very hard to go collect and clean the specific types of plastic because not all plastic's the same. So there is an effort to do that. So we want to start tackling this at both ends. So if we can reteach ourselves how to not use all this plastic that we used to really not have that much, we could start tackling it at that end. And then we can also start cleaning up and reusing and repurposing the plastic that's already been made and then that's out there.
All right, Breezy, that's such a good point. One of the analogies I really like is a bathtub. If you were in your bathroom and your drain was plugged and your tub was overflowing, would you start mopping up at the bottom? No, you try and figure out a way to turn the tap off. So I think the number one thing, you're right, is we've got to stop using as much plastic. Then we can start thinking about some really cool and innovative ways to use the plastic that we already do have. So I think that's a really good point. And then just to share something too here, this is a skateboard by a really cool company called Grenier. And this skate deck is completely made from plastic fish nets that have been recovered from the waters out in Chile. So they try and get the fishermen to donate their nets before they hit the water, and then they can make them into products like this and sunglasses that we can use. All right, we're going to go to Mr. Taylor's class because they have to switch classes soon. So we want to make sure we get some questions in. So they are in Niagara Falls. There's a high school class. Let's get their microphone turned on. Mr. Taylor, if you don't mind turning it on for me, you guys can say hi, and then we'll grab a couple quick questions before you have to go.
All right, say hi, everybody. Hi. Okay, Jaden, you're up first.
Okay, when did you decide on the career that you chose?
Can you speak up for me?
Yell it.
When did you decide on the career that you've chosen to do?
I've always been intrigued by the water in general. when I was a kid, it was a little different than when you're growing up. We were left outside until it got dark. So it really made us go explore our environment. And there was 3 ponds on my property. So I was always going frogging, fishing, playing in the swamp, swimming. And when you grow up, you always look for a bigger pond. So it went from a pond to a lake to the ocean. So I love being involved in all forms of water. So I just have the exploration bug. So I always want to travel and see what else is new and how everything differs between cultures. So.
All right, to Mr. Taylor's group, if you have another one, go ahead, because I know you have to leave soon.
Sure, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Is there anything else that we can do other than just recycling to help the animals that are being affected by it?
Can you say that again?
Real loud.
Is there anything that we can do in to really help the animals that are being affected other than just recycling?
A lot of it's going to go back to just reducing your waste input, and the material or garbage that you have, make sure it gets disposed of properly. I know they've been doing a lot of work with the plastic rings that they have on soda cans, actually taking the step to cut up the soda can rings. I know a lot of people to this day that still don't do that, but luckily a lot of people or a lot of industries are pushing away and not using that. And the big one is recycling, reusing things. We don't need to have plastic bags floating around. We can have regular bags. So those are the big ones.
And I would add to that exactly what you're doing right now is important. Being curious, learning about problems that are happening not only in your community, but outside of your community, and looking for ways that you can be involved, whether it's writing letters or petitions to local government or state or provincial government to make changes on a larger scale that can help out. There's a lot of really cool groups out there that you can find, maybe even in your own community. You can actually get out and do some of those cleanups and stop things that are kind of on their way into the water. So stop them at the source or stop them on the ground with beach cleanups, river cleanups, things like that. And if you can keep that from getting into the water systems, that can have a big impact on the wildlife as well. So Mr. Taylor's class in Niagara Falls, thank you so much for hanging out with us today, and have fun transitioning to your next class. So let's go to another one of our live classrooms. Thanks, guys. Let's go to Thunder Bay. Some grade 4s hanging out with us at St. Martin Elementary. If you guys want to turn your microphone on and get nice and loud, say hi for us, and then go ahead with the question.
Hi.
Yeah, straight. Walk right up.
How does pollution affect the sea animals?
It can affect them in a lot of ways. So it can affect their growth if they swim into something or get caught into something. It can affect on how they eat if they ingest some of the pollution. Sometimes it will cover them, such as oil. So it will make it hard for them to just go around and be in their environment because it gets very sticky. So there's a lot of different ways pollution can affect all the sea creatures. So really good question. It's a really big one to answer.
Breezy, if I can get you to add to that, have you ever in your travels encountered any issues with seabirds and plastics? I know that's a pretty big issue right now.
Several times. Even when I was a fisheries observer, we would find dead birds all the time from either ingesting plastic or having plastic rings suffocating them. So, of course, I don't take pictures of that because that's hard, but that's things that we need to think of and that are out there. Even walking on the beach, I'll find a lot of seabirds caught up in debris washed on shore. So.
All right, we did last September, we had a live hangout from a lab in Rhode Island, and they did a dissection of a seabird's stomach for us. So a seabird that they found that had actually been caught in fishing net out in the ocean, And sure enough, inside of the stomach, we found several pieces of plastic inside the stomach that, I mean, it's when you eat really small things in the ocean, it looks like food, and it's very easy to be confused. All right, let us go and visit. We've got a group hanging out with us in Ottawa today. I'm not sure of their grade level, so we'll get them to tell us when they turn the mic on. But if you guys want to turn your mic on and say hi, and then let us know where the students are from.
Hi, Joe. We're a grade 7-8 immersion class in Ottawa. We just came on late. We do apologize, and we do have a few questions.
Don't worry at all. We're just happy to have the 7-8s hanging out with us. But go ahead with the question.
Do it. Oh, Neach, go.
Oh, okay.
Nice and loud.
Do you think there are any substitutes for plastic that we could use that don't damage the environment as much?
There's stuff that they're creating now that potentially won't be as bad. And I use potentially is because when I was a kid, they were making a big deal of switching to plastic bags because plastic bags were there to save trees. So they wanted to switch from paper to plastic bags. And now, 20, 30 years later, we're actually seeing the damage that plastic bags have had on our environment. So there's a lot of great ideas that I hope that are very successful. They found that we can make plastics out of plant material. We're finding just going back to having reusable canisters, such as the metal canisters you guys have. We're using paper straws, metal straws. So there's everything we have. We can make other things with it. And then it's going back to how much of everything. So if we rely on one natural resource to correct the problem, we're going to deplete that resource. So we want to find ways to spread it around. So there's a lot of great innovations that are coming out right now, and hopefully they'll be really good answers to the plastic crisis. But again, we have to see how it turns out in the long run. So that means we should try a bunch of different ways to combat the plastics problem.
That's a good point and a really good story to share that, you know, plastics were thought to be this great material, could take some of the burden off of the trees, but it just shows good research sometimes before you start something new is really important. And yeah, so really good point. I'm glad you brought that story up. Mm-hmm. Alice in Kitchener, Ontario, if you want to turn your microphone on and go ahead and ask a question, we're ready for you.
What do you have to study to do what you're doing right now?
So luckily you could study a lot. And there's also things that you could just follow a passion. So you don't need a degree to go and make a difference. The idea is just to keep educating yourself when you have that passion and keep learning more of what you can do. So when I went to school, I went for geology, geological oceanography, marine biology, and underwater archaeology. So I went to school to be a pirate. But I've also taken my experiences in the Coast Guard. I was actually a cook in the Coast Guard working on boats and stations. So that all led to information that I've known now. Even serving as a boat captain, there's a lot I learned just from local communities and talking to people. So learning really anything about the ocean will help. Science is always great because science is the frontier of trying to correct problems, engineering as well. But never limit yourself to what you can learn, and look across different fields and industries, because sometimes we might not think of connecting the dots to solve one question or come up with an answer for another. So.
All right. Awesome. Good advice. Anything in the sciences, especially water related. But like you said as well, a lot of people followed their passions. They may not have a formal science education, but there's still lots of ways that you can get involved and make a career out of exploration, working with different organizations. So you can still have an impact even without a traditional science education. There's lots of different ways to follow your passions. Mrs. Smith's class, we're going to swing through our classrooms one more time in Illinois. If you want to turn your microphone on and go ahead with the question, we're ready.
I've got my question already. Come on up. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can.
All right.
Okay. So I know you were talking about how plastic is like endangering animals and their food. Are there like any other materials that are doing that, like paper, wood, leather, and another like liquid ones like poison, ink, and gas? So other like, have you ever seen anything like that on your expeditions?
So I've seen a lot of oil spills coming from old canisters. And then you'll also see hazardous material leaking out again of these old metal canisters that are rusting through. That's another big one. So that's how come I'll include abandoned infrastructure. So a lot of the infrastructure that's remaining is all made out of metal. And a lot of times they'll leave some of the stuff that they were using at that area behind. And a lot of the canisters back then were metal. So the metal's rusting out and leaking everything. So.
All right. Mrs. Garofalo's group in Thunder Bay, if you want to turn your microphone on, go ahead with another question.
Why are we dumping the garbage in the ocean?
Like, how does it end up there?
Yeah.
So before we used to actually dump it in the ocean, not knowing it was bad. But now we've learned that it is bad to dump it into the ocean. But think even just for the simple factor, the saying, all rivers lead to the ocean. So if all of your garbage from your house, some of it accidentally gets blown out of your garbage can, that gets blown into a stream, the stream goes to a river, it will all congregate into the ocean. So there's a lot of reasons why it will end up in the ocean and all around. So a lot of it, when we do throw things away, we need to try containing it and throwing it away properly. But again, the best way is if we didn't have to throw it away and we could reuse it or use it permanently, that would save us that problem.
It really seems silly now, but you have to remember that, you know, decades ago, years and years ago, we didn't have the same environmental studies that we do now. So looking at the oceans, looking at it being so big, people thought, you know, this is a convenient place to dump our garbage, and it's so big, how can we affect the oceans? But now we're finding out that we can have a huge effect on our oceans. So it's unfortunate that it took us so long to figure it out. But I guess it now means that we can try and do something about it and try and fix some of the damage. Let's go back to Ottawa, our grade 7 and 8s. If you guys want to turn your microphone on one more time, we'll steal another question.
Tina?
What is your opinion on degradable plastics?
Can you say that again?
What's your opinion on degradable plastics?
Just from what I know about the original plastics, I always use it with caution. So I think it's a great idea, especially the plant-based plastics. But you still look at the timeline of how long it takes for the degradable plastics to break down. And sometimes that's 3 to 6 months. So if that escapes into the ocean, that's still 3 to 6 months of an animal being able to consume it. So, and again, we don't know what the future effects are of the degradable plastics. A lot of the degradable plastics we have now too, we don't have the proper recycling centers to be able to handle them. So they actually get thrown away. So a lot of it's just putting the pieces together and see, it's a great idea. How can we make it the best idea? And is it really going to be the best idea in the future? So. Good question.
Yes, good question and good point, Breezy. As you mentioned earlier, you should really find out about the waste handling plants in your area, because there's some plastics that may say recyclable, but if it can't be recycled in your area because the plant's not there, it's going right to the garbage. Awesome point, Breezy. Breezy, have you heard anything about the wax moth larvae that can break down plastics that they
I've heard a little bit about it, and I've heard a little bit of a bacteria that is able to break it down, but I haven't had much time recently to fully see and learn that much about it. But from what I've heard, I hope it works, and I hope it's a great new area of ingenuity.
Yeah, so boys and girls, if you have some time to look up afterwards, it's called the wax moth larvae. And studies show that they can break down little bits of plastic, but I mean, that sounds really exciting, but there's also negatives too. You need tons and tons and tons of them doing that. But scientists are trying to figure out now, can we figure out what enzymes or what it is in their stomachs that let them do that? And then can we replicate that somehow? So all kinds of people are thinking really hard about these problems. Hopefully we'll come up with some more solutions in the future. And Alice, we're going to go back to you in Kitchener. If you want to turn your microphone on, go ahead with another question.
What materials cause the biggest problem for wildlife?
Can you say that again for me?
What materials cause the biggest problems for wildlife?
That one's another big question because it depends a lot on the location, and a lot of it is on the quantity of whatever the material is. So sometimes we might have a lot of metal deposited in one area where it's actually beneficial. It can become a artificial home for critters to live on. So we'll actually see that on the base, like on the wind farms, there'll be coral reefs growing onto them. But sometimes if the metal's breaking down in some areas, that might actually be toxic for another. Plastics are always a big one for being a major problem, just because there's so many different kinds of plastic and what plastic can do to the animals themselves. So sometimes even wood that's natural is good for an area, and sometimes it's bad. So a lot of it has to deal with quantity too.
All right. Good question and an awesome point. Is it can really be dependent on the areas. And I think a really good example of that too is plastic floating in the ocean. Although it's never good, it does sometimes provide kind of a little bit of a habitat for, you know, fish or other small creatures who are looking for shelter in those kind of open areas. But I think on a whole, it is probably a bit of a negative. So Breezy, we have 5 minutes left. Are you okay if we just open things up and let the classrooms, if they raise their hand, we'll visit them again?
Sounds good.
All right. So who's got another question? Where should we go first? All right. So let's start off in Thunder Bay. If you guys want to turn your microphone on one more time.
How many waters have you been in?
How many waters have I been in? Was that the question? So the only ocean I haven't been on is the Indian Ocean. So ocean-wise, all but the Indian. I've been through all the Great Lakes on the St. Lawrence. I've been to a couple of the seas in the Mediterranean. So, and it's funny how each body of water actually can be drastically different. Even from the North Pacific to the South Pacific, there'll be a lot of similar organisms, but you'll see a lot of different things in those areas. So.
All right, good question. There we go. Someone's waiting patiently in Illinois. If you want to go ahead and turn on your microphone.
Okay, step up.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Moth, and our class is planning to do a project on to reduce plastic. Where's a good place to start?
Well, it's fantastic that your class is starting, because that's a good starting spot. It's a group of people with a shared passion. So if you're looking for resources, you could always Google places to look that might already have projects that you can help get involved with. Because a lot of times people will start a project and there's another project that's almost the same thing right next to you. So you can help share the similar knowledge and information from each project. Is that the kind of answer you're looking for?
All right, perfect. Well, good luck with that project. If there's any pictures from it, send them to us because we'd love to see classrooms in action. And then I think I see someone waiting patiently in Ottawa. If you want to turn your microphone on one more time.
Hello. So you talked about your expedition earlier when you took community members diving to look at the types of waste that had been put in the ocean, I believe. I was just wondering, which community members did you take there? Was it students? Was it teachers or parents or seniors or just community members in general?
So with Sedna, we were focused on younger women, and we also brought one of the elders. And it wasn't just focused on pollution. That's things that we would see around us. We were just showing the organisms and what the seafloor was like. Especially a lot of the places in the north, they have a drastic tidal difference. And even below the tide lines, it's a lot different walking the beach than being able to snorkel that same area covered in water. Yeah,
and I think if you want to dig a little bit deeper into that work, look up Sedna Epic online. Yeah. And you can see some of the projects they're doing. I think it's so cool that you're going into those northern communities, and you'd think that they'd have a little closer relationship with the water around them, but in a lot of cases, you're bringing them into the water and introducing them to that ecosystem for the very first time. So it's a really cool project and a great way to get people thinking more about the aquatic ecosystems, not just the land ecosystems.
Yeah.
All right, Alice, if you have one more question, give me a wave at the camera. No? Okay. So Breezy, before we sign off for today, what's next for you? Do you have something on the horizon, a new trip, a new project?
A couple of trips planned. I had some family emergency come up before, but hopefully Norway with Sedna again. We're going to go snorkeling with humpback whales and orcas. And then hopefully trying to get involved with another plastics sailing expedition. So a couple of things working up. I'm just trying to figure out my schedule. So.
All right, very cool. Well, if you end up in the water with humpback whales and orcas, we better see some pictures because that sounds pretty incredible.
Yeah. They'll have plenty of pictures. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be able to get my schedule straight to join them. So.
Perfect. That would be amazing. Breezy, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing some of your adventures. Thank you for sharing, some of the things that you do to try and reduce our waste, reduce our footprint. I really appreciate it. I know the classrooms do as well. And of course, we look forward to the next time we can steal you after an adventure.
No problem.
All right. Well, boys and girls, last thing we'll do, if your teachers can turn on the microphones for us and just give a big wave and a goodbye and a thank you for Breezy, and then we will sign off for today. So if you want to turn those mics on, you can get a little bit loud if you want. And there we go. Excellent job as always. Boys and girls, thanks so much for hanging out. Enjoy the rest of your week. Breezy, enjoy the rest of your week. Sounds like I'll see you next week. And we're going to
sounds good
for today.